There's a fucking crane. 1, 2, 3. Check, check. This place needs heavy oil. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Hey, this place needs heavy oil, dude. Where do you get your heavy oil usually? Oregon Grove? For sure. You guys got a train yet? Dope. Yeah, we live in Foundry. We're doing that concrete up there. Over here, buddy. Great. Use this one.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, let me see, do we have Howie's up there yet? Dude, we're so close to Howie's on the southwest side. Is this sandstorm? What the fuck? It sounds like sandstorm. Oh, this is something else. I forget what it is though. Completely forgot what it's called. These are all ass. Given this makes a chance. Okay. Chugging right along. Let me see. Holy shit, the other one spawned too. They moved it. Thank fuck, dude. Go get some of the spaghetti my wife made earlier. That shit was fucking delicious. She learned from me. how to make the spaghetti better. We experimented together, honestly, a lot. What's up? Just getting concrete. Components in concrete. Oh well, shit happens. The guy ended up going to repair his little base. I forgot to look. Oh yeah, it's repaired. Cooking anything? Yeah, he is. Cool. Except he needs components and shit in there. He's got 2 heavy trucks over there? Yeah, we're coming back for a heavy, dude. You stole one of my heavies, guaranteed. 43. Jesus Christ. How's it 43? Oh, I'm connected over here. Oh, I guess I need a wrench. No wrench, but hey, that works. I get some kit, at least. Okay, there's a truck. I need a crane, though. I think I have no crane. That's okay. Let's get some B-mat and make one. Did all that disappear? God, I hope so. Almost. Almost. There is a crane over there. I guess I could use that one. God, when is that gonna die? 115. I need there to be nothing in there, man. Oh, there's no wrench. There's 2 wrenches in town base. Oh, there we go. Yeah, let's apply settings on 0. We do not want this factory here anymore, my guy. This is trash. Complete trash. Yo. I did not want your factory here. There's nothing in that maintenance tunnel, so I don't have to worry about it. I'm gonna go make more tea and take a break soon. Let me relock this. Where the fuck is Swan? Come on, man. There we go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let me make sure. Yeah, so that's 5 times. I just need 100. I just literally need 100 over here, so I have 400 extra. So I'll just palletize 100 from the other bob. There we go. What's up? That's a beefy meta. That only did 7% damage on tier 2. That's pretty good. It's gonna be fucking hard to crack on concrete. Can you get a dump truck, my guy? There's some on the south side of town. Bring it over to that southeast spot. Yeah, thank you. Might go get some more tea started. I'll be right back. We'll be back, guys. We'll be right back.
On a few light issues that he would give pushback on, and then had kind of agreed to resolve. Interview over, everyone goes home and has a wank. But the problem is that Tucker sat there dumbfounded for over half an hour as Putin droned on and on about the time Peter the Great and Stalin joined forces to defeat the evil Ice Queen and retake Castle Grayskull to defeat the orcs of the Third Age, and that's why Ukraine didn't exist. Tucker attempted several times to get Putin back on topic, to get that soundbite out of him, but Putin ignored him and instead kept talking about that one time the Russian Tsars all banded together to form the Megazord to defeat the evil Lizard Queen hidden in Earth's secret second moon, thus saving the Earth from invasion and inventing the potato at the same time. And this is more telling than anything, more than anything he actually said, which has been debunked about 100 times by now. It's this rambling, this meaningless rant, and the fact that this was allowed to happen that is the telltale sign of what is really going on within the walls of the Kremlin. Allow me to explain. Prior to this war, many in the military hobbyist sphere regarded Putin as a bit of a bald badass. This somewhat undeserved reputation of Putin is an illusion, a creation of propaganda that has been carefully curated by those around him and by his advisor, Vladislav Surkov, a man who came from theater and who used the act of performance to turn Russian politics into a pantomime of heroic displays and patriotism, a race of beings capable of the extreme feats of human endurance, the most badass, but most importantly, the most chill, people who wouldn't complain and whine but just get on with things regardless of any extreme. In the world of soft soy boys, they were the nation of true hard men. And at the head of it all, the perfect Russian leader, the supreme image of masculinity, which radiated this idea of Russian power and Russian exceptionalism. I remember being at a War Games club many years ago, long before COVID, and a friend of mine was talking politics, comparing Britain's own weak-looking then leader, David Cameron, to that of Putin, pulling up a video in which a Russian factory on the verge of shutting down was in its final meeting with its shareholders. In walks Putin and demands the factory be kept open. No one argues with them. They even all sign an agreement that the factory will remain open, saving the jobs of all who work there. And to cap it off, someone tries to steal his pen and he demands it back. It took a lot not to tell my friend that this was a complete work of propaganda. It was completely set up. The whole thing, right down to the pen stealing, was a stunt designed to make everyone else see the strong leader called Putin. Stunts like this were enough to impress my friend and was likely aimed at specifically people like him, people who were tired of incompetent, weak-spined governments and thus were more open to loud political stunts full of bravado and one-upmanship that dictators churn out like crappy TikToks, which people are encouraged to refer to as refreshing. Along with Putin's perpetually confusing political stances on various subjects, for example, donating and supporting to pro-LGBT charities and activism groups, while also banning images of the rainbow flag and comparing gay men to pedophiles, supporting pro-liberal groups while encouraging and rewarding groups of neo-fascist skinheads for attacking them, and supporting democracy while crowning himself president for life and arresting and eventually killing his own political opponents, etc., etc. Putin would play out this bizarre hypocrisy which kept the Russian people in a state of semi-confusion. But because people have a tendency to cherry-pick and because news is always targeted towards a certain demographic, it meant that most people, regardless of political affiliation, always saw Putin as an ally, even if a secret one. This meant that political arguments always happened around Putin, directed at those on the other side of the political line and not at Putin himself. So if things went wrong, Putin was never to blame. There was always a fall guy. And this all worked because Putin was never directly in charge of anything. Surrounding Putin were his advisors. Sure, Putin was the front man, he was the one in the newspaper, with the fancy suits, the car, and the image, and perhaps he fully did believe that he was in charge. But surrounding him, his closest friends, his advisors, would take his orders for the day and translate them to the Duma, the Russian parliament, if you understand the nuance behind the word translate in that context. This meant that Putin could continue living in the mental state he needed to be in to present the image he needed to be to the Russian public, and to a lesser extent the Western public, and he was undoubtedly rewarded for doing so. But it also meant that he was deluded into believing he truly was the person the propaganda claimed him to be, and as this war has gone on, his advisors have dropped off one by one. His interference and micromanaging of this war has increased until we arrive at the point where he has taken full command, and the illusion has finally been shattered. For most people, this was the first time they had ever heard Putin speak without a script. This was the first time they had ever heard what he actually believes. There was no show, because there was no one left to put it on. Zarkov resigned in 2020 and is currently under house arrest. Gherkin is in prison, and as the rest of Putin's advisors have dropped off the map, the ones who have remained have sensed the change in the air. As the various oligarchs mysteriously fall out of windows, as arrests for crimes for questioning the rule of the great leader continue to rise, and even recently, as Putin's long-term political opponent Aveli died in prison, it has become pretty obvious that being opposed to Putin right now is a pretty bad idea. And the people who surround Putin at the top right now are veterans of surviving political purges. They are smart enough to know exactly what to say to keep the great leader happy. This means when Putin's generals say they have destroyed 500 American Abrams tanks, Putin believes it. He genuinely believes he is in a mano-a-mano struggle with the entirety of NATO, and he is winning. So excuses for Russia's slow progress can be made, because all of NATO is fighting him while he stands alone. This is not a product of stupidity. Putin is not an idiot. This is just what happens when you exclusively surround yourself with people who only ever agree with you. It happens to everyone. It'll probably happen to you. But you're not in charge of sending 500,000 people to their deaths, so I don't know. We're entering a strange new world now, with new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no man has gone before. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Like, what this interview tells us is that there is basically no one at the helm of the Kremlin's macho Putin PR machine. And what you are seeing is basically Putin without the mask, without all the clever editing, the scripts, the body doubles, and the team of spin doctors that surround him. And Putin has basically gone feral. He's gone against Tucker, he's even gone against Trump. He is not dancing to the same tune as everybody else now, and he actively refuses to do so. So everyone else is left trying to figure out how this strange new dance goes and sing along to the words that they can't quite hear. Essentially, the future is now uncertain. Putin has gone off script, and no one is quite sure what he's going to do next. When people talk about the Great Russian Bear, this is what they mean. Bears are unpredictable by their nature. Bears can never be fully domesticated or tamed. Bears do what they want. The American right, the conservatives, believed that they could domesticate Putin and use him as a tool of their culture war. The Kremlin, and to a point the right-wing movement in America and Britain, have been paving the groundwork for that for years. And American conservatives worship Putin as this pseudo-alpha male defender of Christian and family values, even though he's not Christian and his wife divorced him. They believed that they could use him as a tool to further their own goals, but Putin is not playing along. And everyone who was in on it is now slowly realizing that Putin does not dance to your tune, you dance to his, and he will use you to further his own goals, and if he can't... Putin carefully herded the reactionaries and contrarians into doing his bidding because, like everyone else, they always saw him as a secret ally. But Putin never cared about them or whatever struggle they envisioned themselves fighting. He only inserted himself into the American culture war to slowly erode popular support for Ukraine. But beyond that, he didn't care about anything else. They were merely a tool to support his own ambitions, and they were promptly discarded once they ran their usefulness. But as long as his goons were shouting libtard at Ukraine supporters, everyone on the right was eager to go along with it because, well, it fit their narrative, and yeah, there was a sense of superiority there, wasn't there? And everyone on the left was doing the same, except this time the goons were chanting, America bad, something something Iraq war. But hey, you're a smart boy and you're immune to propaganda, ain't ya? But now the illusion that this war was all somehow tied to the American deep state has been shattered. The Vatniks are now faced with the reality that Putin was not an ally, he was just using them, and they have been left with two choices: pretend that it all didn't happen and carry on as normal, or realize that they have been gaslit into actively participating in an information war in which the end goal was the genocide of the Ukrainian people and the theft of their lands, which they were more than happy to go along with because they were being manipulated by a foreign government and encouraged to call it patriotism. Their entire shtick was a simplified reduction of an overcomplicated 30-year-old ongoing political situation boiled down to its most simplistic form and delivered to them through the medium of quote tweets, memes, and grifters posing as experts. Their knowledge has been passed through so many simplification filters it barely resembles anything close to factual accuracy, and all it has achieved is to mask the reality that hundreds of thousands of people are dying while they sit in their comfortable homes playing at politics, patting themselves on the back while they watch entire cities get vaporized because, hey, that sure showed them libs. There is no reward at the end of this for all of them. The dominoes are not going to fall in their favor, and when the Ukrainian war ends, regardless of the outcome, they will simply be herded on to the next big thing by whoever wants to use them to further their own political goals. And maybe some of them will be smart enough to get off the train, but if there's one common thing I have noticed among the Vatniks, its intelligence is not exactly their forte. And for every one Vatnik, for every grifter that steps down, there are 10,000 who would kill to be in their position. That just leaves one final question, and it's the biggest question on everyone's lips. It was at the start of this war, and it still is somewhat today. It's the question Putin spent over half an hour trying to explain while utterly failing to answer, which is why. Why invade Ukraine? In 2014, Putin had basically seized a region the size of Belgium, cementing his dominance over the Black Sea. With an active territorial dispute, Ukraine would not have been allowed to join either NATO or the EU without giving up any territorial claim over Crimea and eastern Ukraine. Ukraine was still economically dependent on Russia for gas and oil, and it still feared the Russian army, which was still seen as one of the largest, one of the most powerful, and one of the most respected in the world. And best of all, no one cared about Ukraine. People protest angrily at NATO and America for being viewed as an imperialist colonizing world power, but when actual imperialistic colonization from a major world superpower happened directly in front of them, no one gave a shit. In 2014, Russia waltzed into a sovereign nation, a developed nation in Europe, and simply annexed part of it. And all people could do was giggle at how much of a badass Putin was and how funny the whole situation seemed to be. In fact, America was still trying to deepen its ties with Russia. Europe was happy to become solely dependent on Russia for cheap oil and gas, and we're even starting to see Putin as a bit of a friend. So much so that when both Obama and Trump tried to make Europe take Russia more seriously as a threat, they were both laughed out of the room. European nations were gradually reducing their military spending, and even though there was some attempt to assist Ukraine in redeveloping its armed forces after 2014, this was token at best. Ukraine actually got frustrated numerous times with just how lackluster NATO's response was to its needs. No one in Europe believed Ukraine was in any danger, and if Russia did invade, well, it would all be over in a matter of days, far faster than anyone could possibly be expected to react, and well, no one was really going to shed any tears over it anyway, so what was the point? And besides, Ukraine wasn't even unified as a country. It saw itself more as 3 individual regions with its own customs and cultures, not a united nation. And Putin's invasion changed all of that. As one Ukrainian soldier put it, we weren't a nation before, but now we are. And though Ukraine would still refer to NATO's response as lackluster, its efforts have been monumental in comparison to what it was doing previously. Modern jets, modern tanks, and equipment have finally been made available to them. And while the Vatniks will jeer and gloat every time Ukraine loses one, no one can deny they have been highly effective. And though the EU has not exactly been lightning fast to respond, like a fat man who's fallen asleep at the party, it's woken to realize the buffet is now open and is lurching towards it at speed. Europe is rearming, Finland and Sweden have joined NATO, money for future weapons projects has suddenly been found, and development into alternate gas and oil infrastructure has been a major focus. Putin's oligarchs have lost almost the entirety of their holdings in Europe, half his war chest has been seized by the banks, and regardless of the outcome of this war, his entire army will need to be rebuilt from scratch. But worst of all, his reputation is in absolute tatters. The Russian army is no longer seen as the ferocious, dominating entity it once was. In fact, people now question why we even feared it in the first place. Russia's weapons export potential, which was a huge part of their development funding, is now basically null, and all the oil and gas it was selling to Europe is now being sold to China at an even larger discount. And though the Russian economy hasn't completely collapsed, the cracks are indeed showing. In one move, Putin gambled and lost basically everything. So what was he hoping to gain? Why gamble it all on Ukraine? What's so important about this one small Eastern European nation that Putin was willing to take that risk? The thing is, no one really knows. A lot of people have theories, and, well, the real reason is probably incredibly complicated and known only to Putin himself. Like I said, this is a 30-year-long period of history between 2 of the most corrupt countries in Europe, masterminded by a man whose gradual decline into insanity would have been comedic gold had it not been for all the blood and death. It's also a situation that has been completely ignored by the West, and bringing everyone up to speed on the spaghetti of information would take longer than I probably have left to live given my diet of wine, anger, and unrefrigerated sticks of butter. Thankfully, I don't have to. A channel I reference a lot but I've never gotten around to giving a shout out, Sarcasmatron, did a 4-part video series on the whole situation, dating right back to the start of things. It's several hours long and comes the closest to bringing any sort of answer to the question of why that I've seen from anyone else, so I would strongly recommend you watch his videos, and I'll leave links to them in the description. Crap, I just realized he did the same joke in his video about no bullshit. Hang on. Okay, forget that. That never happened, okay? Shut up! You can't prove anything! But part 4 of his video series touches on a personal theory of mine. I had been working on my own video about it, so I'm somewhat annoyed that I wasn't the first to get to point it all out, but that's my own fault. Now I'd rather you go watch his video about it, so I'll be brief and cover the basics. And the basics are, Putin believes in color revolution theory. Now you may be asking yourself, dear Laserpick, you handsome bastard, what the living freak is color revolution theory? Well, dear child, allow me to explain what color revolution theory is. Color revolution theory is the idea that a shadow organization that, operates behind the scenes, unseen by anyone. Pick your favorite. It's often the CIA, though it does flip between, the American deep state, the Illuminati, the British royal family, and of course, the Jews, are responsible for every major revolution since the end of the Second World War. Yes, all of them. It is believed that through things like left-leaning news sources, social media influence, and performance art displays, the idea of rebellion is implanted gradually in the youth of a generation, and as this generation gets older, its frustrations with the establishment are amplified. It is encouraged to rebel against the older traditions and generations, and the tools of protest are made available to it through the use of paid actors who take the mantle of protest leaders, riling up the population into a bulging riot of banners and cardboard signs. This eventually forms a powder keg situation in which the slightest trigger will set the whole thing off. And when it does go off, which our chosen shadow government puppet agency will absolutely make sure that it does, the country openly rebels. This time not with cardboard signs, this time with
Alright, let's do some concrete while this goes.
Bombs and other big explodey, gunny machine things that we all get excited about in this community, with the shadowy background figure group funding pro-revolutionary forces and flooding their ranks with paid mercenaries. Now, does any of that make sense? Because to the layman, that all sounds plausible. It sounds like something which is probably happening. In fact, you could probably name a country or two where this kind of thing has absolutely definitely happened. Because not only is a version of this conspiracy theory used to hand-wave away how socialism has never worked because America always interferes, it also forms the basis of another conspiracy theory, cultural Marxism. That's right, the hard left and the hard right believe in the same conspiracy theory, just under a different name, and they haven't realized it yet. But the reality is, the whole thing is utter nonsense. Every government in the world has at one point attempted a sort of experiment into this exact sort of thing. Every government, every major corporation, and even a lot of random individuals have invested heavily into research on mass manipulation. You may know of one called MK Ultra, which is probably the most famous of these attempts. Though what MK Ultra actually is often widely obscured by generations of conspiracy loons. It was research into a truth serum, that's it. That was all it was. It was just a truth serum. It never worked. The CIA buried it because they were embarrassed about the time and money they spent trying to chase a dream. That's it. There's no greater conspiracy. They're just embarrassed by it. But to the person who supposedly cracks it, unlimited wealth is at their disposal. Every government in the world would pay everything they have to make their populations just agree with everything they do without having to bother about the democracy bit of their democratic government. Dictators could live without ever having to face challenge to their rule, and corporations could exist free of competition. It's all very, well, cyberpunk. But the thing is, perhaps the most important thing, which has been revealed time and time again anytime someone gets this idea, is that in all the attempts made, every single one of them, it simply proved that such a thing just doesn't work. But explaining why such a thing as color revolution theory is complete bollocks and why it doesn't work in spite of numerous and increasingly sophisticated attempts is in itself a complicated matter. Effectively, color revolution theory, and to the same extent cultural Marxism, though I still do plan to cover that specifically in a different video, probably at the end of this year when I'm too drunk on Christmas wine to read the comments, is something that is easier to believe is happening because it has the illusion of truth to it than be explained to why it most definitely
Oh, you're not done.
isn't. But as has now been well documented that I am completely insane, I will give it a try. I promise to try and not be boring about it, but there is a lot to explain here, so here goes.
But yeah, do more.
Okay, so before we begin, I have to explain something. You see, there is a secret side quest in life reserved entirely for people studying literally anything on the Soviet Union. History's a bit weird like that. Investigating the history of literally anything will inevitably lead you down rabbit holes. But investigating the history of the Soviet Union is not a rabbit hole, it's a Skyrim-esque adventure with DLCs. The Soviet Union has inspired so many great comedies because it is literally that ridiculous. The plot of Dune, explained by 3 separate drunk individuals who've never actually read the book but do vaguely remember seeing the old 1984 film.
The guild does not take your orders.
Would be easier to understand than the history of anything the Soviet Union has attempted to actually do. It is a pantomime of bureaucracy, a triumph of incompetence masterminded by a ruling class whose mind processes run parallel to Reddit mods. That is not a compliment, by the way. The Soviet Union was not a country, it was a parody of one. Everything it ever tried to do was entangled by each and every individual along its overly complicated bureaucratic processes, each introducing their own special brand of corruption, incompetence, political agenda, self-interest, and of course whatever money and political favors they could grub from it. This is an environment that breeds a very special type of person, a person who exists in a world where everyone has to constantly prove their superiority, their dominance. Everyone is out for themselves, everyone has an agenda, and trusting anyone is a short path to the gulag. Secrets must be protected at all costs. Your true identity must be buried in layers of masks that you wear for each and every person. Everything is a deception. Everyone is trying to use you for something. Competence is suspicious and paranoia is rewarded.
Go get a
And
shovel.
every day, every single second of every minute of every hour, you must be prepared to defend your position in the entire chain against anyone who would rather they have your position and all the trappings that come with it. This is life in the Kremlin. This is the crucible that birthed the minds of the people who currently sit in power in Moscow. These people do not see the world like we do. They see it as a reflection of the world they know within the Kremlin and treat it in the same manner. They view the world in conspiracies, plans within plans within plans. No one can be trusted. Everything is a deception. Every word said a lie, trying to disguise a greater meaning, and every action the result of a well-planned and coordinated attack. There are no coincidences in this world. Nothing just happens. Everything, regardless of how minor, is the footprints of a plan of some nemesis hiding in the shadows, waiting to strike. And to these people, there is no leaving this life. That paranoid world brings a feeling of comfort that is such a fundamental security to them that the idea that anyone around them could be open and honest is instantly dismissed as a trick. That is the mental state of a conspiracy theorist. One so far gone that the idea that there is no conspiracy is such a terrifying thought that anyone who proclaims as such must be one of them out to get you. So if you can imagine a room
Or
full
will
of
it be in the way?
Fox clones attempting to run a country, you might be a step closer to understanding
Make sure
why
that you
Russia
can
is
get,
what it is and why it do the things it do.
Make sure you can get
Keep
through
that in
here if you
mind,
need to.
because it will be important.
Let me put an engine room
But
right
first,
here.
we should address the United Fruit Company in the room, because most of you by now will be furiously screaming in the comments, "That's all good and well for you to say the government's..." No, sorry, that's the wrong
Engine
voice.
room?
I should be doing the
Up and
whiny
down,
liberal
up and
voice.
down.
Hang on 2 seconds. "It's all good and well for you to say governments around the world
Is it not
are
right now?
trying to manipulate revolutions, Mr. Pig."
Oh yes, yeah. Let's do it's our town. Yes, let's do engine rooms and Howie's. We're a refinery town. We have the B-meds.
We have an entire wiki page full of the times the U.S. has interfered in the ruling of another country and imposed things like regime change. In fact, anti-U.S. sentiments across Latin America are fueled by a series of regime changes that pushed into power dictators that were backed by the United States government. The fact the U.S. did this is famous. Movies have been made about this. It's page 1 of any thesis any modern philosophy student writes. It's spanned by literally hundreds of Russia bot accounts every day. How could you not know this, Mr. Pig? Are you stupid?
Wow, that's a strain on the throat. Here's the thing. Yes, the CIA has implemented regime change when it suited them across multiple countries.
How long
And
do you
though
steep
the
your
CIA
milk tea?
won't happily take the credit for these, the thing
For how long do you steep your milk tea?
I drink water.
You don't drink fucking green tea with milk?
I live a boring life.
Have you ever drank green tea with milk?
It's been a while.
For how long did you steep it?
I did not prepare it myself.
Jesus Christ.
I'm a weakling.
Here.
Oh, I don't have a hammer.
I got 15, we need to get like a Chad veteran flagger team and get rid of all these shitty small rails.
Yeah.
There's concrete mixing at that eastern base. Oh, but it's my queue, goddammit. Never mind. I'll submit it when it's done.
Oh no.
You can't walk through there. If
Yeah, I tried to make it just big enough. You know, with different hitboxes. Satch.
oh well. Put B mats here.
most people don't seem to be aware of is the CIA lies. Quite a lot. In fact, in many places where the CIA has intervened, not only has their involvement been blown up past the point of the extreme, it regularly failed to work. In fact, more than half the time, it completely exploded in the CIA's face. There's a reason they don't do it anymore. Guatemala is probably the most famous examples of a US-led coup against a democratically led authority. The history of it will probably make you hate the US, the CIA, and the Chiquita Banana Lady.
I'm Chiquita Banana, and I'm here to say I am the top banana in the world today.
Ba 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 ba. Look, we were all thinking it, okay? In short, this was a CIA-backed coup against a democratically elected leader of a country who had been slowly introducing socialist policies such as minimum wage and welfare. The US saw this as communism. But even worse, this drove up expectations for both wages and working conditions for those under the employ of the United Fruit Company, who insisted that the US intervene so it could keep its workers basically living under slave conditions and thus not affecting their bottom line. Because if there's one thing Americans hate more than anything, it's paying slightly more for fruit.
Digging into those in every Kellogg's pack. We'll keep 'em coming back.
So the CIA intervened, and a few short months later, Jacobo Arbenaz was overthrown, and military dictator Carlos Castillo Mas was installed instead, who immediately reversed all those nasty socialist policies. I'm probably butchering those names, so I apologize. But the thing is, this wasn't a revolution, and the CIA failed. Twice. Once in 1952, where an operation to use fruit-carrying freighters to smuggle guns into the country was almost immediately discovered by the US Customs Office, and thus the CIA was forced to abandon the plan. And then again in 1954, where even with hundreds of pro-revolutionary fighters funded with US money, with US guns and planes, they lost every single battle they fought in. The population refused to rise up in arms, and the CIA were considering pulling the plug when the Guatemalan military suddenly laid down its arms, and Arbenaz stood down. And what had done it was not a populist revolution, it was the fear the country would be invaded by the US if Guatemala won. The CIA proudly slapped themselves on the back, installed their puppet dictator, who immediately seized full control for himself, resulting in a 40-year-long civil war and the genocide of the Mayan people. Go America. And yet, the CIA decided this coup was so successful, it would form the template for all future attempts, such as in Albania, where it didn't work, or in Cambodia, where it didn't work, or in Cuba, where it didn't work, or in the Dominican Republic, where it did work, and then the US puppet government they installed was almost immediately overthrown, or in the Congo, where it failed so badly, it threatened to become a proxy war with the USSR, and Belgium had to come and bail the US out. The thing is, I'm not trying to make light of any of these incidents. America has done some up shit during its short reign as a world superpower, and it should
Tried to
feel some
maybe
measure of
concrete
shame
might
in that. But
change the collision,
reality
but
is,
oh well.
that does not make it unique among any other country in the world. The British Empire invented the concept of the concentration camp. The French didn't invent slavery, but they did make it a cornerstone of financial stability in their empire. Spain left a trail of massacres, tortures, and rapes in the wake of their empire, and the Soviet Union is responsible for over 30 massacres in its history, resulting in the deaths of tens of millions of people, as well as spending a considerable sum of money training and supplying international terrorist organizations willing to target Western nations out of a base in Dresden, East Germany, coincidentally where Putin was based during his time in the KGB, which included the IRA, the Red Army faction, and anything anti-Israel, including something they have allegedly continued to do to this day. But I'm sure Hamas launching a major attack on Israel at precisely the exact time Russia needed something to distract the US away from Ukraine was just a coincidence. Oh, and if you think what the US was doing in South America was bad, the USSR was doing the exact same shit. You just don't know about it because that side of history is quite rarely taught. And the thing is, it's not wrong to discuss America's crimes. In fact, many would argue that's the foundation of a stable and good society, where we can be critical of ourselves and our actions and demand that we as a nation, or even as a civilization, be held to a higher standard. You live in a country where you can criticize your country's actions without consequences. They are known and taught openly, and that does work to keep ourselves in check. When people want to read up on American or British war crimes, they have to open a history book. If
Partisans do come back here, so lights are definitely worth it.
Short, anything bad
And I've fucking safe spotted so many garrisons on front lines with Spatha because they don't have lights.
Become national scandals and hot political talking points. In Russia, That's just Tuesday. It
Like, I
does
could
have its
literally
downsides,
rush
however.
through
They're a
these two
combination of
garrisons
Russian and Soviet propaganda,
with a
conspiracy
tank.
theorists,
Yes.
misinformation, and that good old Noam Chomsky America bad culture that runs through many student unions. The story of these events has been overemphasized to the point of the extreme. And while it's good these events are being highlighted so that people are aware of them, their use purely as propaganda tools rather than as discussions of our own behavior as a country and how we should tackle things like foreign
If you're
policy in the future
not
as a
going to
reflection of
concrete
that
those
has
garrisons
meant
right
that a
now,
certain element
I can disconnect the tech trench and build a piece in between. That was
Oh
all
yeah,
I-
totally. Yeah.
Ah, 3 hours. No. Time to fill.
Oh, F.
Yeah, the road piece, you probably know, has a fat AT blind spot on the right.
Yeah. We could put another one on the other side of the road. And get rid of all those fucking rails. Just, yeah, just flag those rails and put a fucking, map marker down and start calling for people to come flag. Like Peepo and shit. Tell them we gotta tie in defenses. We can do underground trench and reconnect the rail. But just do one instead of that big fucking mess that they got over there.
I'll flag first.
Oh wait, it's a people rail. Here, let's just fucking hang on.
of these stories, the involvement of the CIA has taken front and center stage. Perhaps inadvertently, the CIA has been elevated to the position of that of a god, capable of Illuminati-style operations where men in tight suits and black sunglasses are capable of controlling the world. Ooh. Whereas in reality, the CIA is no more competent or capable than any other intelligence agency. But for years, the crimes of America has been taught to the Russian population, and in doing so, the godhood of the CIA has actually become part of Russian culture. It's an in-joke in Russian society to blame the CIA on anything bad that happens. Fruit prices rise? It was the CIA. Trip over a rock? CIA. Your grandmother finds your porn stash and smacks you over the head? Probably the CIA that told her. Even Putin believes it. But unlike the Russian public who see it as a meme, he takes it seriously, and he has directly accused the CIA of doing everything from inciting soldiers to kill journalists to creating the internet. He has even accused both Obama and Hillary Clinton of using the CIA to incite a color revolution within the borders of Russia. When conspiracy theorists claim things like the Arab Spring was all a CIA cover-up, Putin believes them because he lives in the magical Kremlin wonderland. So any evidence that this is not a case or anyone telling him he is wrong is obviously an agent of the conspiracy trying to fool him and thus not to be trusted. And the thing is, what he's failed to realize is in all the examples I gave above, those were not color revolutions. The CIA did not incite revolutions encouraging populations to rebel against their government. They tried, but they couldn't do it. You know what was easier? Simply finding some idiot who desired power and could be convinced to see things from the US point of view if they got enough things from the Sky Mall, and then simply fed them enough guns and drugs until they were in power, which inevitably backfired because power-hungry idiots do not tend to be great leaders. In each of these situations, when a populist rebellion did happen, it either went against US interests, such as the Dominican Republic, or was already in progress long before the CIA got involved, such as in Brazil. In times where it has been suspected of involvement, such as in Euromaidan with the famous Prut phone call, the reality of the situation has been obscured by the sheer amount of misinformation which surrounds the event. Sarcasmatron covered it pretty well. Now, none of this should be surprising. When people talk about cultural Marxism, what they fear is that socialist and communist ideologies are being taught to the young in order to prepare them for a pro-communist uprising. The people they always blame for this are not world governments with anti-US mentalities or actual communists, it's the Frankfurt School of Thought. This is because their arguments come from canned arguments found online, which can be traced back to neo-Nazis who have found the Jew to blame, and thus no further thought or investigation is required. In the same manner, the minds of the Kremlin have found where the CIA is to blame, and thus no further thought is required. They found the conclusion they want. The Euromaidan phone call is not just an intercepted communication from Ukraine looking for advice that never really went anywhere. It's the cornerstone of all the evidence Putin needs to prove that the whole thing was a CIA plot. It doesn't matter what else happened or is said, or even if no actual evidence of CIA involvement has ever been found, all of that can be dismissed because we have that phone call. James Randi, someone who is a personal hero of mine, was an illusionist who spent the later half of his year debunking what he referred to as woo-woo mysticism. Psychics, faith healers, healing crystals, people who claim to have some sort of magical power beyond the realms of known physics. He is most famed for his fiery takedown of one Yuri Geller, the famous faith healer and televangelist Peter Popov, and of course the $1 million paranormal challenge, which offered a cash prize of $1 million to anyone capable of proving they have a psychic ability under laboratory conditions, which remains unclaimed to this day. One of Randy's more interesting lectures was that you cannot prove Santa Claus does not exist. After all, we can scour the North Pole and find no evidence of any gigantic workshop full of elves. They're invisible. We can throw reindeer off a roof and prove that they cannot physically fly. But those are normal reindeer, and every idiot knows that Santa's reindeer are specially bred reindeer who can fly because of pixie dust, which, though that is a childish description, it's probably a special ancient medicine made from all natural ingredients which has been lost to time outside of this one recipe, handed down through generations and generations of Santa Clauses unknown to science, who is too busy with their microscopes and their chemicals to understand the miracle of nature, etc., etc. You get the picture. The point is, to any believer, there is no proving them wrong. Everything can be explained away, and everyone trying to stop you is either ignorant of the truth or in on the whole thing and trying to stop you finding out the real truth. So any evidence against the conspiracy can be ignored. That is how Putin sees the world around him. This is how he thinks, and the life he leads within the Kremlin's fortified walls has been designed through generations of supreme rulers to protect its members from having to interact with reality. Because if you can't see reality, then what reality is can always be easily dictated to you. we should really talk about what color revolution theory is, by which I mean what color revolution theory really is. It's supposed to refer to a series of pro-democratic revolutions that happened between the year of 2000 and today, specifically in Serbia, Georgia, Adjara, Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Armenia, Belarus, and the various Arab nations caught up in the wave of the Arab Spring. But here's the thing. There still exists considerable debate in academic circles if or not the term color revolution even means anything. And if so, what exactly is it referring to? Out of all the revolutions referred to as a color revolution, other than them being revolutions, the only thing which binds any of these together is the fact they happened after the fall of the Soviet Union, and the internet may have played some role. But tools of mass communication typically often play roles in revolutions. A key role of the French Revolution in 1789 was played by newspapers. So is the French Revolution a color revolution?
Red, the blood of angry men. Black, the dark of ages past.
In actuality, no. It's not allowed to be, because color revolution is almost an undefined term. Even Wikipedia cannot agree on what exactly it means, describing them as protests that resulted in regime change, which is literally the definition of every revolution in history. Originally, the definition had been any revolution in a post-Soviet state with the intention of establishing democracy. But then the Arab Spring happened, which many consider to be a color revolution, and Russian propaganda has spent a considerable amount of effort attempting to convince everyone that the CIA was behind it all. But none of the Arab states are former Soviet states, so that part of the definition had to be dropped. But if a color revolution is just any revolution to bring about democracy, then the American Revolution of 1765 is a color revolution. A red, white, and blue color revolution, and that can't be allowed, so the definition within the age of the internet now has to be added to limit the timescale. That opens up a new can of worms, because now all the anti-communist revolutions of the 1980s and all the attempted anti-communist uprisings and protests that took place in the wake of the death of Stalin can now no longer be described as color revolutions. But the events of January the 6th can. After all, the protesters' end goal was, well, democracy. They genuinely believed their votes were rigged, and they were the ones defending democracy against subversion. And this attitude had been cultivated by, well, the internet, and the media personalities they had been watching on the internet. And the CIA had nothing to do with it. So now the definition has to be changed again. This time it's not democracy we're establishing, it's Western-style democracy. Though this is probably coming from George Bush Jr.'s use of the term by which he claimed that everything pro-democratic was a color revolution because Western democracy is inevitable. Of course, by that he meant the Purple Revolution, also known as the Iraq War. That was a revolution. It wasn't an invasion. Silly newspapers making stuff up again. You can never trust the mainstream media, can you? The thing is, it's very tempting to sit here and argue what the exact definition of Western democracy or a color revolution is, but let's not beat around the bush. A color revolution is just whatever revolution that exists in the world and in history that Putin and those who think like him believe is the fault of the CIA. As such, the definition of what exactly is a color revolution has to keep being changed so that the end goal, proving it's all a CIA op, remains intact. It's kind of like claiming that all birds are evil, and you can prove it because all birds fly, and all flying things are evil. And if someone points out the existence of birds that don't fly, you simply state, well, those aren't birds, because all birds fly. Well, what about flying fish? Well, those have scales, and birds don't have scales. Are you stupid or something? Flying fish, what a moron. You're not finding the common connection between everything and using that as the basis of the conclusion. You're starting with the conclusion you want and omitting anything which disproves it. It also distracts from the fact that you've made the connection between flying and evil and refuse to explain. But that's the thing. That connection never needs to be made. The connection is taken on faith that it's there. If it can't be found, it's not because it doesn't exist, it's because you failed to find it. That connection can never be proven to not exist, because color revolution theory is not an academic or a scientific study, it's a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy theory that has been painted with the veneer of just enough clever-sounding scientific woo-woo terminology to give it the air of legitimacy.
locked
So that you go
the,
into it already believing that the foundation
truck
work
on top of
that
the
all
East
things
Bob
that
here.
fly are evil has already been concluded by serious experts. So the end bit, the CIA is responsible, is the only bit you're allowed to question. And of course, if you're willing enough to go along with that, you'll be guided onto the correct conclusion, because if you dig enough into any revolution or any major political event throughout the world in the past 100 years, you will inevitably find some trace of America. America is a global superpower with its fingers in many, many pies. So in almost every major event within history post the Second World War, you will find some link back to the United States, and to color revolution theorists, that's all they need, because we know the CIA is involved, so the presence of any trace of America, regardless of how vague, can be used as evidence of CIA involvement. A random American in the crowd, an American tourist who happens to be ex-military, photographed getting off a plane, a phone call to the American ambassador, communication activity within the American embassy, to the Papa John's nearest Langley getting a little busier than usual, are all things that have been used as evidence of CIA involvement in any revolution labeled with a color. This is research through the method of Wiki Hitler. You can go to any article in Wikipedia and just by clicking hyperlinks get to Hitler. This is because any page can be linked to a country, and almost every country in the world had some involvement in World War II. Like the cultural Marxism crowd, they found the link to the people they want to blame, and thus no further thought is required. The idea that 18 million Americans will go through military service within their lifetime, and those who do typically gain more interest in traveling abroad, or the fact that any embassy would probably send and receive a lot more communications if a revolution was happening within the borders that they were based, or that pizza joints typically do get busier on a Friday night, are all irrelevant facts there to distract you. The bottom line is, the CIA is involved, and this proves it. As I said in my video on the Challenger, most of us in this community have never lived under communism, neither its rule nor its threat. But for Eastern Europe, communism wasn't a theory or some fun, rebellious thing that edgy teenagers believe in. It was reality. I cannot convey what it was like for people to live under communism. But what I will say is I've met people who have lived under communism, and the mental scars of that time still exist. A friend of mine who is a folklore historian has traveled to many places in Eastern Europe where the scars of those memories are very present. In one incident, he recalls showing a group of people in a village in Hungary a rather silly comedy show about communist bureaucracy, and this was enough to apparently reopen some very, very deep wounds. Communism is only remembered fondly by those who lived at the very top during its reign and who benefited from their positions. And of course people who have never lived through it and simply see it as a positive through the lens of capitalism bad, and therefore synthesize the narrative that communism bad must come from capitalist propaganda and can therefore be ignored. Statistically, at least half of you started thinking that the second you realized where this chapter was going. But you're immune to propaganda, ain't ya? To those who actually lived under communism, it was a nightmare. The protests that came from the collapse of the Berlin Wall in '88, and later the total collapse of the Soviet Union in places like Poland and Hungary, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Estonia, and Lithuania, were not the cause of a power vacuum left in the wake of the death of an empire, but the celebration of its passing. Satellite states of the Soviet Union, those who suffered the most and were stripped bare in order to serve the needs of Moscow, had the most to celebrate. Their joy, the death of communism, and the independence that finally came with it are celebrations that go unmatched in history. They are overwhelming in their positivity and hope for the future. That to lapse back into the grasp of dictators, to be pulled away from that vision of a Western-style life with its promises of not only freedom, but in general a better life for your children, are so overwhelming that to feel it would never happen so long as your incompetent government continues to produce Stalin wannabe dictators who operate behind the illusion of democracy but always seem to retain power regardless of how much they mess everything up, is enough to cause a population to, will take a more proactive approach to the term democracy. The desire for your children to grow up in a world better than the one you knew is one of the fundamental beliefs of every parent on the planet, and one of the few things that unites all of humanity. The reason why God, country, family is such an effective way of manipulating people is because when the world becomes too overwhelming, the average person retreats back to what is important to them, which is their personal morals, the place they live, and their family. And so long as nothing is directly affecting those three things, then they will rarely go out of their way to care about anything else outside of that scope. A lot of people couldn't give two shits about children dying in other countries, but when it's your family who is under threat, that's when the knives come out. And that's what's actually happening in these revolutions. And people who thought they were progressing towards a better life suddenly find out that they're not. And not only are they facing a lifetime of gradually declining living standards under some toll, but so are their children. The wall has come down, and they have been exposed to the potential of a better life and a better way of doing things. And the idea that the hardship they suffer is required to protect them against the corruption of the West no longer flies. They've seen the corruption of the West, and they want to be part of it, because it's better than being part of the corrupt East. Every single revolution currently described as a color revolution was against a corrupt dictator in favor of actual democracy, not the feudalism disguised as democracy that they'd always lived under. That's not something that is unique to any of the color revolutions. That's just what a revolution typically is. They are largely, throughout history, about overthrowing tyrants. It's about a people who have lost all hope, and in desperation, they fight for what they believe is a better future for themselves and their children. And brightly dressed students beatboxing about Karl Marx, economic slavery, and role-playing as anarchists rarely has anything to do with it. I mean, yes, the phrase student movements do come up quite a lot in revolutions, but that is normally because students typically have a lot more free time to do things like protest. Trust me, when was the last time you didn't see a student protest happening? But the thing is, when you are a corrupt dictator in charge of a country, the idea that this is just a thing that happens in society is terrifying. So a cause has to be found, because it cannot be that your loyal
What's up, Dollar Menu? What can I do for you?
Hey man, how's it going? So I haven't played in like 8 months or so, and so when I'm trying to place my bunker defenses, the angled pieces are causing it obstructed when they're set together on the square piece. Sometimes goes up
So the only way that you can do an angled piece with a square piece in front and then a square piece to the left or right of that is by doing something called corner cutting. Have you ever corner cut before?
I have, but I don't remember how.
So what you do is you place your triangle with your square at the head of it, right? You're tracking? Are you tracking?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so and then you delete the triangle, and then you put the square to the left or the right of it, or both, and then you dig the left or right squares, and then you delete the square behind it. You have to make sure you have some kind of square behind your triangle. That way you'll be able to replace the triangle when you're done. So once that left and right square are dug, you'll be able to temporarily put it into triangle upgrade mode, facing towards the triangle that you want to place that'll be obstructed. Does that make sense?
No, not at all. I totally lost you there.
Okay, so you got
Where
the
are you at? So you have time to show me?
Yeah, go to Sataria in Great March and just grab a shovel out of Town Hall, and then I'm going to the comp field to the west of that.
Thank you.
Grab just 2 shovels actually.
Are you going to the conflict
West of Sataria, yeah. It sounds like you're too far away from your mic. It keeps cutting out.
Yeah, move it.
What was the fucking heavy oil, man? Goddamn, why does no field have heavy oil? So I'm at that comp field on the Squad X. You see it? Dollar menu.
I had to,
What?
I had to walk.
Oh, you're here?
Check.
Yeah, there you are. Okay.
Jesus.
It's really hard to hear you. Your mic is scuffed, dude.
It might just be my suit.
Make sure the correct one is selected in your audio settings. Here, drop your shovel. Okay. And come over here when you're ready.
Is that any better? Voice volume?
You turned it up a little bit too loud, but yeah, it's a little
Yeah.
better now.
How about now?
You're fine. Okay, so temporarily put that there. And then we'll do this. Okay, dig this one. And then to do a corner cut, you'll upgrade it temporarily to the corner piece, and then if you're quick enough, you won't need one B-mat to tap it and shoot it after. You could just do it quick. You can hold shift and then right click to rotate your piece to make sure it's in the correct location, then release shift. And now it'll let you place it, because it cuts off the corner right there. Watch out, don't get stuck. Now you can put your other square, and then now you have a corner cut piece.
See. Now, when I see people do it, it looks like there's a little bit of space between them. Is that just like a visual thing? Or is that a different design entirely?
You mean just having another bunker like really close?
There's one that people, it's named the Nagato Foxhole planner.
That's curving. That's exploiting. That's curving. That's like a different fact. Like I don't do that shit. That shit's fucking cheap.
Yeah.
But you can.
I've just seen a lot of like around. I see people have it built like that. I was just trying to line up those,
Shit's fucking cheap. You don't need to do that shit, dude. You can be better. You can be above that. So like you
it
can
looks
put
pretty good.
you can put a bunker right next to something when it's in blueprint mode like this. But when it's built, you're not gonna get as much. You're gonna need more clearance. So this is as close as you can get once it's built. So when you're in blueprint mode, you can get closer.
So like, show you something here if you have a second.
What?
Just 1 second. If you have a minute, I'll show you what this design is. These corners. 'Cause I seen you did that, and I don't recall that thing you showed me.
I'm having to
That's
do a
something new I
lot of
learned.
like context clue guessing what you mean. Your mic is pretty
Yeah.
stoked.
It's just 1 second here.
Well, it can't take too many seconds. I gotta farm components.
I'll help you in a minute if you just.
Okay.
This right here, this square, it's obstructed. So I had to place like a.
Yeah. So when you do that trick, when you put,
Yeah.
you do the exact same trick, right? So when you put this down, instead of putting a square down at the end, you put a triangle down. And instead of, what do you call it? Instead of having this completely clear, put your square that you intend to put here, or else it'll get obstructed. So like, you would have to put this square first, and then do your corner cut. So like, delete this, and then do your corner cut. So like, you can place it when you delete the triangle. Delete this. So here, you would place your square here, so you can replace this. You delete this. You dig this, and then corner cut it right here. Cut this corner right here, and then when you cut that corner right there,
I can place the triangle where we're standing.
yes, and then you can replace the other triangle here.
Gotcha. Alright, that helps me a ton. Thanks.
Yeah. The other three are yours. I don't know where a sledgehammer is, buddy. Maybe in the bob just to the north? Yeah, just to the north in that bob. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, man, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we're building foundry for concrete.
Nice. I haven't played in quite some time, and I couldn't remember how to get the things on.
Yeah,
I think it's a different trick. Though. Yeah.
bunker defense is something else, man. My container is there behind the truck.
Yeah, the issue with my mic is I have a mouse button on the side that I use to push to talk. It's busted.
Oh, okay. You don't want to use the button, another button.
I've only got 4. They're all the same too. It's not actually busted. It's just designed for them.
No, I feel you. No, I mean like a keyboard key. You don't want to use a keyboard key or something.
Keyboard key.
Well, I mean, until your dollar menu asks and go get another mouse.
It's actually a great mouse. It's just a shitty button.
No, I feel you.
So, one of them Logitech G Pro or something like that. One of them.
Yeah, for sure. You're generally okay. As long as you got DPI settings and a few extra buttons, it's nice.
Yep. And then my mic I just got not too long ago. It's like one of these shitty little ones you sit on your desk. It's annoying as shit. One?
No, I feel you. Go turn it down a little bit more. It's clipping now.
How about that? Is that a little bit better?
Yeah, yeah. Like, everybody can turn you down, but when it's clipping, it just sounds muffled.
Hmm. I'm gonna go warm up some Paschetti. I'll be back.
After this one inventory, I think I'll go back to my building.
Yeah, hell yeah, do your thing. Appreciate you.
Sheep like populace who obviously love you will seemingly at random just turn against you with little warning, and that's somehow your fault. There has to be some sort of external influence. And when you have fought your entire life against the dominance of the West, guess who's first in the pipeline to be blamed? The people who believe in color revolution theory are technically onto something, but to them the theory is just a way of simplifying the complexity of the world around them in such a way so that they are never to blame. Instead, the blame is deflected towards a singular shadowy group or authority who could theoretically be capable of it, that can be opposed and fought against with a singular and, most importantly, simple solution, which can be whatever you want it to be. More money for the military, 9 p.m. curfews, restrictions on immigration and foreign work visas, a big wall, kill every pregnant cat. It's up to you. And the best part about this whole thing is because it's a shadow organization, everyone bad is, in theory, working for them. The murderers and thieves behind your skyrocketing crime rate, the corrupt politicians, the aid workers that make you look bad in the news, the farmers who just couldn't supply the entire country's grain when all their farmhands were sent off to join the military, and even the weather itself are all CIA agents. And if you torture anyone for long enough, they will absolutely admit that this is all true. This completes the illusion that Putin is never to blame for any unrest within Russia's own borders. The fact that Putin lives in a $1.6 billion palace that reportedly has its own private casino and toilets made from solid gold, while 48% of his population, or 70 million people, do not have access to an indoor toilet, has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that there might be some people in Russia who believe that their current system is a bit unfair. No, it's all a CIA plot. This makes it easier to think about. There's a clear us versus them narrative now, an enemy to unite everyone against, focus all our attention on, and take the blame for anything bad that happens. And no one needs to sit down with Putin and explain the complexities of a public engineering works. And that's what color revolution theory is. That's what it really is. It might seem weird that someone who can climb to the point where they are in charge of an entire country could be fooled by something so idiotic as a conspiracy theory, but this is the unfortunate reality of being a dictator. As I said right back at the start of this chapter, they live in cultures of paranoia, carefully protected from reality by the illusionary gold leaf world of wealth and power that they construct around themselves. That bubble is built to protect them, and the thing they seek the most protection from is the idea they don't actually know what they are doing. Like I said, dictators don't tend to be great stewards of the economy. They are historically terrible leaders, they act on impulse, and they act on ego, and they fuck everything up. The other great elephant in the room we should address is any of this actually true? Even if we assume it's not the CIA behind it all, many people would be in agreement that even if there is no evidence for it anywhere, it's very possible that an organization like the CIA could trigger a coup in a country, and it's probably happened before. So ignoring the example I gave earlier where I showed the CIA in fact does not have anywhere close to that kind of power and has operated almost entirely on luck and economically enslaving a dictator by supplying them with weapons, supplies, and the money that they need to live the life of luxury they think they deserve, while brutally imposing their regime and occasionally reminding them that if they don't do what Uncle Sam tells them, then all of that goes away. Which is what happened in the late 80s and early 90s in South America, where the West began to withdraw funding from places like Chile and their dictatorial governments gradually collapsed, which might be another reason we're seeing so many anti-dictator revolutions in our lifetime, since their existence is no longer beneficial to the superpowers which kept them in power. But ignoring that, is something like color revolution theory possible? Well, no, it's not. You'd be right to think there are governments and institutions out there with massive influences over your life who are probably trying to manipulate you. And that is a conversation that is important to have. But the disappointing reality is that these institutions generally don't have the power to point at a country and go, "New regime, please." And the reasons why are deeply complicated. It would take a long time to explain, and the reason why this video, which I started editing back in January, is so late, is because I initially wrote a script attempting to explain all the reasons it doesn't work. That script is 162 pages. In the words of a great internet legend,
Ain't nobody got time for that.
So, to be brief, like I promised I would be, but que sera, sera. Things like cultural manipulation, interestingly, follow the same rules as hypnosis. Now it's gonna seem a bit crazy, but let me explain. Hypnosis doesn't work if you know you are being hypnotized. Or to be more precise, you cannot be hypnotized against your will. And even if you are being willfully hypnotized, you cannot be made to do something that you don't want to do. You have to want to do it to be made to do it. Cultural manipulation works the same. If you know you are being manipulated, it doesn't work. It only works if you want it to. If you want the things it is saying to be real, then you're more likely to believe it. You're less likely to be skeptical, and you're less likely to do research. This is why manipulative propaganda always tells you what you want to hear. Again, God.
Washington said we needed to follow Christ, or we're never going to succeed as a nation.
The founders were overwhelmingly of the Christian faith, following Jesus Christ, a carpenter.
That God created this nation, that He wrote the Constitution, that it's based on biblical principles.
Jesus loves you. Why doesn't the government vote yes?
Country.
Under President Trump, America is stronger, safer, and more prosperous than ever before.
More than
You imagine putting your life on the line in Afghanistan and having just a leisure time and wanting to watch a football game and seeing your players, your American players, disrespect the country and the flag on foreign soil? Can you?
Family.
Posted thousands of wild posters asking the delegates on the Commission on the Status of the Women to stand for life and family values.
So, with a family of 10, it gets a little crazy. So, we have some pretty simple rules in our house. Clean your room.
No teenage boys in your bedroom.
And no lying.
Especially to the FBI. For us, it's all about family.
2016年12月，在会见第1届全国文明家庭代表时，习近平总书记语重心长地讲到：“
家庭是人生的第一课堂，父母是孩子的第一任老师。有什么样的家教，就有什么样的人。”
That stuff included the Xi Jinping
There is
family quote.
sufficient
That's amazing,
evidence that
dude.
Wagner's Internet Research Agency was involved in the American culture war. Because if you keep getting told what you want to hear, that your enemies are vulgar and stupid, and of course, the real Nazis, and obviously you're better than them and on the right side of history, which is what everyone wants to hear, I'm right and the people who disagree with me are just idiots. It's not that I'm wrong. Absolutely not. Then you can gradually be convinced that the things you care about are under threat from those people, and slowly recruited into a cause which appears, even if superficially, to support your concerns. In reality, they just paint a giant target on the head of anyone they don't like and tell you that they are the real enemy, and abuse cult-like attitudes to keep you angry enough that you'll never stop to question yourself, and anyone who tries to point all this out is clearly an agent of the conspiracy, and blah blah blah, so on and so forth. The final rule of hypnotism is it doesn't work on everyone, and people build up an immunity to it over time. Even if Wagner was, and likely still is, involved in the culture war, Gamergate was over 10 years ago. The actual culture war, the great revolution, never came. You could maybe look at January the 6th and probably see that as the end result Wagner were looking for, but in terms of revolutions, January the 6th was a wet fart, and by the end of the day the people involved weren't digging trenches or setting up roadblocks or laying mines, preparing to defend themselves against the US Army's response, even though the majority of those involved are the kind of people who proudly own multiple firearms and scream loudly from the rooftops about how the right to bear arms means the government can never fully take away their freedom, and they will fight anyone who disagrees. On the day, the actual day where they had the opportunity to do that, they all went home, they all went back to work, and by now, most of them don't even remember it. Everyone might want the Great Civil War in America because they feel overwhelmed by all the crap they see in the news and feel the simplest solution is to simply wipe the slate clean and start again. But outside of a few pockets of extremists, no one really feels the need to be part of it. They just want it to happen. In the background, done by, you know, other, more prepared people who know what they're doing when it comes to that sort of thing. They more envision themselves being part of the world that will be rebuilt once it's over, not the people who will be living out in the wilderness for 5 years, digging trenches and getting shot at and hunted by drones, trying to make it happen. Now, none of this means that any of the stuff the Internet Research Agency and various other similar establishments within Russia and China and Iran don't work. They do, and it's admittedly kind of scary to see how far their influence reaches within Western society and how few people seem to be willing to take it seriously, but their end goal of manipulating people into overthrowing their governments is not a feasible task. And it's very likely that what they started to realize is something like that, even if it were possible, would take generations to achieve, far beyond the expected remaining lifetime of all those aging reptiles. You know what's easier? Finding some idiot who desires wealth and power and supplying them with enough money and drugs until they are in power and threatening to take it all away unless he dances to the tune they play. But what do I know? I'm just a silly British person. But if you want more evidence of why color revolution theory is impossible, then this is exactly what Putin has been trying to do in Ukraine for the past 30 years. Controls of social media, controls of mass media, use of cultural displays, influence in elections, the use of immigration to targeted sectors to dilute the culture there with Russian, programs aimed at economic stability, programs aimed at encouraging corruption within the ranks of the government, a series of bribes and threats against those in power, and even a government-funded militia organization, and finally, a full-blown invasion have all been Putin's attempts to replicate what he thinks the CIA have been doing to trigger the world's color revolutions. And for 30 years, it has utterly failed to work. The playbook has remained largely unchanged in all that time. Ukraine is full of Nazis. The government wants to eradicate the Russian population within Ukraine's borders, ban the Orthodox Church, and ban the Russian language, which in 30 years it still hasn't gotten around to doing, outside of changing a few road signs and deciding that Ukraine's national language is Ukrainian. And for those in the Donbass and eastern Ukraine who were under the full power of this information war, even as they were being armed and conscripted into resistance armies, rather than rebel, simply voted in a person from eastern Ukraine who spoke their language and would look out for their interests. They voted in Zelensky. Putin has attempted time and time again to trigger a civil war within the borders of Ukraine in the hopes that when he invaded, it could be done under the guise of bringing stability to the region, making him the good guy. He honestly believed that Ukrainians would see Russia as liberators, that they would approach Russian tanks with bread and salt, the traditional gifts. Instead, they had stones thrown at them, were spat at, and told to go home. And Putin is left confused. Because Putin lives in the magical, whimsical land of the Kremlin's bubble. His orders were being translated to the Duma through his advisors, but through the same people, reality was being translated back to Putin. His advisors were cherry-picking the best examples of what was going on to create the narrative that Putin's plans were working, and he believed them. This got to the point where mere months prior to the invasion, the Kremlin was ordered to produce a report that claimed that Ukrainians were largely pro-Russian and would not resist an invasion, simply as part of a political exercise. But that report was handed to Putin to save his advisors' asses from having to explain why his grand plan wasn't working, and Putin believed it. He invaded not because he wanted more warm water ports or natural resources. He invaded because he genuinely believed he was on the verge of triggering a color revolution within Ukraine. And yet, regardless of how hard he tries, Ukraine resists him. He's now in his third year of his 3-day special military operation, and Ukraine is still resisting him, and Ukraine is overwhelmingly in favor of continuing this resistance. In fact, they are angry at NATO for not supplying them with enough ammunition fast enough so that they can resist even harder. Even if Russia wants to win this war, Ukraine will continue to resist him. A Russian-backed puppet government would likely be overthrown immediately, and a fully annexed Ukraine would likely lead to generations of armed resistance, terrorist attacks, and instability. But Putin will not back down, because in Putin's mind, Putin cannot be wrong. And if color revolution theory doesn't, in fact, work, then all the efforts he has made into recreating it will have been for nothing. Because you can bet your ass Ukraine is not the only country they have been trying this on. You'd be amazed just how much money certain groups in America, especially those who favor isolationist policies, receive that can be traced back to Russia, with most of it coming via crypto. I've seen it myself in the 2014 Scottish independence referendum. Russia-backed money found its way into the pro-independence movement. Russia bots were highly active on pro-independence discussion boards and Twitter, especially Facebook, and Russia Today was the only alternative media present at major events. The former leader of the pro-independence movement, Alex Salmond, even got his own show on Russia Today. Sputnik even attempted to set up offices in Scotland's capital of Edinburgh during the event. The attempt here was to push the narrative that an independent Scotland should not join NATO, as well as spark outrage among the Scottish population over a nuclear submarine base in Fastlane, and that an independent Scotland should seek to remove this base, Britain's only naval base capable of hosting nuclear submarines. I wonder if there are some clues as to Russia's end goal here, because the same might have been happening in the Brexit campaign. 8.4 million, the biggest ever single donation to a political cause in British history, came from a man who had close ties to the Russian government, Aaron Banks, shortly after meeting with the Russian ambassador to Britain and a Russian spy who was a member of the GRU, a Russian military intelligence agency. Also present at the meeting was Andy Wigmore, member of the UK Independence Party. Yes, that party. It is alleged that he promised the Russian ambassador he could get him close to Nigel Farage, the Brexit campaign's loudest member and proud campaigner of British isolationism, who was supposedly given over $500,000 to appear on Russia Today, where he was knighted by a schoolchild. The investigation into these incidents and to Russian interference in the Brexit campaign as a whole were scrapped by then Prime Minister Theresa May over fears that it would trigger a second Brexit referendum. Whether MI5 continued the investigation regardless has never been made public. Perhaps now you see the narrative in hindsight, but the British public back in 2014 and 2016 certainly did not. And even if they did, no one cared, because whatever Russia was doing, it helped them out. It fit their narrative, and Russia could always be dealt with later. Right? I mean, it wasn't that severe. The whole thing sounds like a conspiracy theory anyway, and no one's going to believe it. Besides, Putin is our friend. It's not like he's actually going to invade Europe. It is rumored that contracts for gold and diamond mining in Russia were waved around to many British politicians, including one Boris Johnson, who dined with Evgeny Lebedev, son of Russian oligarch Alexander Lebedev, former KGB agent and one of Putin's closest friends, or at least at the time, just before deciding to back the Brexit campaign. Of course, none of these contracts ever materialized, if they were even real to begin with. Either way, Evgeny Lebedev in 2020 became a life member of the British House of Lords, meaning he has voting rights on whatever British laws come into power. He was nominated by Boris Johnson. Calls to make public the government's security concerns over this were voted in by Parliament, but these documents have still yet to be declassified. Was Putin doing the same to America? Possibly. YouTube commentators were trying to convince everyone for years that there was no Russian interference in the US elections. But there was. Oddly enough, these were the same YouTube commentators who were trying to convince you that Brexit was a good idea, that the EU was corrupt, push isolationist policies disguised as anti-globalism, as well as anti-immigration policies, support Trump, that the behaviors of dictators are refreshing and should be celebrated, that Ukraine is full of Nazis, and that the liberals are stupid, and of course that Antifa are the real Nazis. Now, I'm not suggesting there is any link here, because, well, there is a term in the study of propaganda called the useful idiot. And, well, I'll let you gather your own conclusions, if it's not already obvious what I'm hinting at. Russia bot farms were set up specifically to learn the attitudes of and manipulate certain demographics of the American population. Members of the Internet Research Agency were required to post or comment on around 50 news articles a day, maintain a minimum of 6 Facebook accounts, each posting 3 times daily, with at least 2 of those posts discussing news articles. Facebook was their major hunting ground at the time. They set up thousands of legit-looking local news websites, which generated real stories to earn credibility, while also pushing alternative stories that aligned with the Kremlin's narrative. And those stories would be pushed by the bots, whose fake interaction would be picked up by the algorithm and circulated out to people who, at a cursory glance, would appear to be reading something from a legit news source. Did they support Trump because they believed he would hand Ukraine to Putin on a silver platter, or at the very least keep America out of Europe's business? The actions of certain coincidentally pro-Trump Republicans in America, as they do everything to delay further aid to Ukraine, seems to support this theory. But of course, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just a silly British boy. Was Putin's long-term goal to create a cultural revolution in Britain and America which supported pro-isolationist policies, leaving the 2 strongest armies in NATO basically inert? If America and Britain didn't care what was happening in Europe, and Germany was too pacifist and too eager for that cheap oil and gas deal, and France continued to never do anything unless it had to, then who was going to stop Putin basically doing what he wanted? And if there was a series of pro-Russian revolutions across Eastern Europe, Europe, then who was to blame him for bringing stability to the region? After all, everyone in the West was so ready to believe that the EU was corrupt and that Eastern Europe was doing so poorly under it, and they all wanted out of it so badly that naturally they'd want to go back to the glory days of the Soviet Union. It was a master plan, a brilliant plan. The problem was, it was complete bollocks. The EU didn't collapse, Britain somewhat regrets Brexit, Germany is rearming, and even under Trump, America still wholly doesn't support isolationism, especially when there's an ass it can kick. And even if there was a growing pro-Russian sentiment across Eastern Europe, there isn't now. Putin is not as intelligent as he thinks he is. I have to take back what I said earlier. He's an idiot. And he's surrounded by an increasing number of idiots who have been Pavloved into referring to his declining mental state as genius, because in the walls of the Kremlin, you must swear fealty to the king. You've been gaslit into thinking Putin is brilliant, or maybe even was brilliant back in his day, politically speaking, but it was the people who surrounded Putin, the Yeltsin old guard, his political machinists, his oligarchs, his former KGB members and bankers that masterminded his rise to power and kept him there. He was chosen because he was considered to be young, liberal. It was thought he would be a steady hand on the economy and guide Russia through a new period of uncertainty, as well as subtly cancel all those nasty investigations into Yeltsin's accounts. Whereas in reality, his KGB agents masterminded cases against anyone who could politically threaten him for power, most notably one Sergei Pugachev, coincidentally the richest man in Russia and holder of many of the Kremlin's inner secrets and knowledge of how Putin came to power, as well as owner of a number of military shipyards which were later sold off to Putin's closest friends at a fraction of their value. Now that would be a video all in itself, but the important part you need to know is Pugachev became the scapegoat to oust the old guard of the Russian Republic, Yeltsin's former elite, and usher in a new age where everything was state-controlled, and Putin could dictate wealth, who became an oligarch and who didn't, filling its ranks with his closest friends and KGB partners. He took everything. He tied the Russian economy directly to the price of oil, and as it skyrocketed, he used the money to transform himself into a god. Positions of state became ways to become billionaires. His new inner circle became nothing but parasites to feed on the wealth he generated, where none of it was fed back into the country. Moscow and St. Petersburg became awash with high-rise apartments, foreign-made cars, and bougie cafes, but for the average Russian, nothing changed. Vatniks and pro-Russian sympathizers can go to Komsomolskaya metro station and show off its marble pillars and chandeliers all they want. The vast majority of Russians do not live in the great mighty Russian Federation. They live in the corpse of the Soviet Union. But Putin's problem is he's running out of friends. For years, he used capitalism as a method of waging war against the West. London became his biggest target, as I mentioned in the Challenger 2 video. In fact, the problem became so widespread that locals still refer to London as Londongrad. But while it's all well and good to corrupt Britain with huge amounts of cash, Britain is not exactly a stranger to huge amounts of cash, and the people who flaunt huge amounts of cash. The upper tiers of almost the entirety of the British political structure are awash with old money, people who can trace their lineage back to medieval knights and lords, and who consider 80 grand a year a peasant's wage. No joke, this is a country where in 2009, a Member of Parliament Douglas Hogg, 3rd Viscount Helsham, Baron Helsham of Kellenthorpe, Douglas Martin Hogg, was ousted for a £2,000 expenses claim to clean the moat of his estate. The moat! And this is hardly an isolated example. This is a country where foreigners trying to take advantage of the British by throwing around huge amounts of wealth and expecting the aristocracy to dance for them is so commonplace in British history, it has become ingrained into their very culture. And the Russians are not the richest nor the most powerful group to attempt this. For all the attention the Russians receive manipulating the British system to their needs, you'd have to be incredibly naive to think the Brits were not doing exactly the same back to the Russians. And Putin's problem was the Brits were better at it than he is. Secret tapes of various oligarch meetings in London were recorded by the FSB and later seized by SO15, Britain's counter-terrorism unit. They revealed that, though the Kremlin's influence in London was everywhere, the culture of backstabbing and paranoia the oligarchs were used to was absent. Here in London, they no longer needed to lie. They no longer needed to watch their backs. They didn't need to be suspicious of every single person who said hello. They could make friends. They could be honest with people. They could finally talk about what was on their mind and have the ear of someone who wouldn't use that information against them. In London, the oligarchs experienced something they had never experienced before. They were happy. The problem for Putin was that his oligarchs were becoming anglicized. London wasn't their second home, it was their home. And this sort of loosened his control over them. Though most of them have remained silent, 15,000 of Russia's millionaires, billionaires, and oligarchs have requested either migration or political asylum within the UK's borders. Those that have spoken out, such as Oleg Tinkov, have been widely pro-Ukrainian and warned that no negotiation which concedes Ukrainian land to Russia should be tolerated. What's worse is, as this war has dragged on, Putin's paranoia has increased. 52 of Russia's oligarchs have died under mysterious circumstances, some apparently having committed suicide, others mysteriously falling out of windows. A large number of Putin's advisors who kept the Kremlin bubble intact have either been arrested, been sacked, or been found dead. And now the bubble is starting to collapse. Putin is starting to see glimpses of reality for perhaps the first time in his life, and this sudden realization that everything isn't going according to his plan has left him floundering. He's exposed, and the only thing he can do is just keep scapegoating and killing off the people around him in the hopes that everyone else stays in line and no one else thinks that maybe, just maybe, it's all his fault. Because even if he was a hyper-intelligent manipulator and political chess player that the media has always portrayed him as, the skills required to do that do not transfer to the implementation and management of a global conspiracy. Because that's all color revolution theory is. It's a conspiracy theory. And like all conspiracy theories, it promotes the idea that a series of completely unrelated and often random elements are under the direct control of a shadow organization that no one's ever seen. Because it makes it easier to contextualize and think about. The idea that no one is in control of all this, that there is no intelligence behind it all, no thing with a thought process or a moral structure dishing out punishments based on some grand master plan, that things just happen and there is no grand plan behind it all, there is no conspiracy, is to many people truly frightening. And in a nutshell, that's basically it. The invasion of Ukraine is the end result of a failed attempt by Russia to entice a pro-Russian rebellion within eastern Ukraine. And now that rebellion didn't happen, they are faced fighting an attrition war for no real reason against a population that neither wants nor supports their presence. And this will continue because their idiot of a president believed a conspiracy theory and is now too proud and stubborn to admit that it didn't work. And everything has just ballooned far beyond his control. He has no plan. He has no idea what to do, so he'll just keep grinding more lives against the millstone until he either throttles some sort of victory out of the situation or loses everything completely. And that's the reality of this war. There is no method to the madness. There is no grand master plan. Putin is not lining up all his chess pieces to make some brilliant big move. He's already made his move. And this is the result. Anyway, if you liked it...
What the bloody hell are you doing in my sitting room?
Ah! It's not because of Brexit, it's not because of Brexit, this is not our fault. There were queues at petrol stations and nothing on the shelf.
So let's cut to the chase here. Why? What did Russia, or at least Putin, think he had to gain by starting this war? It's easy to forget now, with Russia struggling to hold on to its marginal gains, that this was supposed to be the easy part. Even if Russia had gotten its 3-day victory in the conventional war, there was always an even bigger quagmire waiting for them there at the finish line. If they installed a friendly government and left, it would immediately be overthrown. If they stayed, they'd have to face an insurgency. And if they tried to just stop at conquering half the country, they'd have to defend a more than 500-mile-long border. So, what was the plan here? I've read a lot of theories, from Putin going after Ukraine's natural gas reserves to a theory that the Kremlin is enthralled to insane philosophers who all talk like Final Fantasy villains.
Every so-called truth is the matter of belief. So we believe in what we do, we believe in what we say, and that is the only way to define the truth.
American cable news pundits seem to switch between thinking it's because he's gone COVID isolation crazy or because he's always harbored a secret desire to reunify the USSR. For instance, did you know that Vladimir Putin once said
the collapse of the Soviet Empire was a great tragedy?
Vladimir Putin was the man who described the collapse of the USSR as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe.
The collapse of the Soviet Union, quote, the greatest catastrophe.
The greatest geopolitical tragedy.
As the greatest tragedy of the 20th century.
Not just a great tragedy, but the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Never mind World War II.
Even Putin can't decide on a single story. One day he's claiming he needs to resolve the imaginary humanitarian crisis in Donetsk, and the next he's writing insane 7,000-word essays on how Ukraine and Russia are spiritually bonded. And what about the Russian people? Why are they going along with this? Theories seem to range from them being completely propagandized to them just all being orcs. And it's hard not to feel like all of these theories leave a lot to be desired, even if you combine them. However, there's one theory I feel compelled to debunk in detail because it is very specific, it's materialist, it's intuitive, and you sound like a rational, big-brain geopolitics understander when you repeat it. And it embodies a whole historical narrative of Russian-American relations that is very popular, even among opponents of Putin's war. This is, of course, the theory that Russia is acting in preemptive self-defense. Self-defense against American aggression, best embodied by America's decision to expand NATO to Eastern Europe, including, potentially, Ukraine.
In Washington, the foreign ministers of Canada, Denmark, Iceland, Italy, Norway, Portugal, and the United States signed with the nations of Western Union the North Atlantic Pact. This was no treaty aimed at aggression, but a pledge to cooperate in defense of the peace.
For those catching up, NATO is a mutual defense pact. If one country is attacked, every other country in NATO is obliged to help defend it. But if one country decides to go out on its own and start a war, the rest of NATO can say, you're on your own. Since the alliance was founded at the start of the Cold War to deter Soviet power creep, expanding it eastward could reasonably be interpreted as an attempt to strangle Russia, at a time when America was supposed to be softening.
So you know, probably gonna serve you better to work with somebody else as far as a facility goes.
Yeah, I know. I'm doing this with someone else, but I'm learning the game. I've just been playing it for 1 day, so.
Okay, for sure. I highly recommend you work with a facility that's already built, because you're not really going to learn much from just like doing the tapping. You want to learn about design, there's foxholeplanner.com. But like,
yeah, I know. I've been watching tutorials as well, but I really have to get used to the
so
UI
like
and the
so
way
the whole issue is that I'm approaching you right now to begin with, right? Is we're one hex behind the front line, and we're just south of a refinery town, and the more and more facility stuff comes up, we have to think about where we're going to be putting bunker defenses more, no, rather than facilities. There's already a lot of facilities in this hex alone already operating publicly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like, I can't tell you how to play the game. You paid just as much as I did. But
yeah,
I recommend you and your homies work with somebody else that's already here, like Peepo and Golden Root Ranch. Or if you guys go up and start working with Singing Serpent's Coalfield, those guys are really cool. That's in Drown Vale. They're making concrete.
We found like up north here in the hexagon up north, there's this Dutch community. I'm Dutch, so, and we're planning to join them when we're confident with what we're doing, because when the next war starts, we want to be up to speed to be able to help produce and whatnot. So
You can do
I
that
totally
right now.
understand what you mean.
You don't need to overestimate, like. So this is just
No,
this is.
but it's something
So
that we
there's
enjoy.
no, I know. I tell you, I'm telling you. So you can do what you want. Like, you can build this facility here. I'm not gonna stop you, and nobody's gonna come by and flag it.
It's a good advice, though.
Yeah,
I see
yeah.
where you're getting at.
But
It's like for the war effort, it would not be maybe like a good place to build this, because there might be a room needed for bunkers and whatnot, strategic.
It's fine. We got 2 bunkers surrounding you on the east and the west for now. It's not that big of a deal. It's not a front line right now.
Yeah.
But if the front line gets closer, don't be surprised if people end up wanting to flag it and put bunkers.
Yeah, I totally agree. So because we're just building this for today and see how everything works, but say we've learned it and we understand, are we able to demolish everything as well?
Yeah. So just go into upgrade mode with F, and you can do the foundations, and then go out of upgrade mode, and then just press Shift E and go to like the power plant here. There's a little hammer icon with like bricks on the bottom of it.
Oh, there is. I see. It says demolish. Must
Yeah,
be
yeah.
the original builder. Okay. Must be no enemies nearby. Must be done within 28 days of construction. Oh. Okay. Must be fully repaired if apart.
Yeah. Okay, man. I gotta go do concrete.
All right. Thanks for the tip, man.
Yeah, yeah.
Its posture towards Russia. After all, how would America like it if China formed a military alliance with Mexico? But in many ways, the theory that America provoked the war through NATO expansion isn't just about NATO. It's an elaborate narrative of 30 years of American aggression and Russian victimization. There are several lectures that have gotten very popular on YouTube that explain this narrative, but the most watched is this one from renowned international relations scholar John Mearsheimer.
The Russians didn't conquer or invade Crimea because they had a leasing agreement. There's a naval base at Sevastopol, and the Russians were leasing that naval base from Ukraine. So they had military forces there.
Mearsheimer has developed a reputation among certain communities as the Cassandra of the Russo-Ukrainian War, and as a result has become an extremely polarizing figure. I've linked his lecture and others in the description, but for the sake of brevity, I'll summarize. Allow me to present the great NATO sob story of 1991 to 2014. It's 1990, and Secretary of State Jim Baker has... Oh, no. I can't do voices. We're gonna have to do this normal voice. It's 1990, and U.S. Secretary of State Jim Baker and Chairman of the USSR Mikhail Gorbachev are negotiating what to do about Germany. Now that the wall has come down, Gorbachev wants Germany to leave NATO, and America wants Germany to stay in NATO, even after it absorbs East Germany. So in order to get Gorbachev's agreement to let East Germany join NATO, Jim Baker promised America would never expand NATO to any countries to the east of Germany. That should have been the happy end of the story, but America had other plans. Because soon after that meeting, America immediately engineered the collapse of the Soviet Union, then forced the newly born country of Russia to destroy its own economy by privatizing too much. Or too quickly, or by giving Russia not enough aid money, or by giving Russia too much aid money, or by conditioning the aid too much, or by conditioning the aid not enough, or something. I don't know. It depends on who you ask. Everyone kind of glosses over this point. Then, with Russia crippled, America went back on its word and annexed Poland, Czechia, and Hungary into NATO, and then lied about there ever having been an agreement. Then it refused to let Russia join NATO, proving the open door policy was a lie and that the expansion was aimed more towards hemming in Russia. Then it bombed Serbia for no reason, tore up the anti-ballistic missile treaty, immediately started building interceptors, then it annexed the Baltic states, putting NATO troops and missiles within spitball range of St. Petersburg, and it was only finally when America was getting ready to finish the job by annexing Georgia and Ukraine that Russia decided it had no choice but to push back and defend itself by invading first Georgia and then Ukraine. But the American empire, drunk on its arrogance and the blood of countless brown people, instead of taking no for an answer, refused to acknowledge Russia's right to defend itself, forcing Russia to escalate. Now, did America say and do those things? Some of it, but, there's a lot of missing context. And well, it might be easier to go back to the beginning. Let's roll the tape back and start over.
Be back.
By the time the summit convened this morning, President Bush and Secretary of State Baker had shifted its spotlight.
So, in a meeting, Jim Baker does make an offer to not expand NATO eastward, but it's not clear if he meant within Germany or in Europe as a whole, because before he can discuss it further, President Bush tells him to take the offer back. But for a very convoluted set of reasons, Gorbachev comes away believing that he has an implicit agreement that NATO won't expand. Why didn't Gorbachev push for an explicit agreement? Because he was desperate for cash.
But the Soviet president's biggest headache is surely the economy, deteriorating by the day. Westerners who work in the Soviet Union say it's like living in a third world country. Upper Volta with rockets is the way one put it.
Gorbachev was taking heat from all sides. The leaders of the republics wanted more autonomy. The people wanted an end to empty shelves. And the hardliners in the KGB wanted Gorbachev to focus on holding together the empire. So Gorbachev, to keep his head above water, brought together a team of experts and economists, and they created a plan for a relatively quick but orderly transition from an entirely state-run economy to a mixed market economy. The plan was called the 500 Days Program, and it would keep the Union together, get food back on the shelves, and provide enough autonomy for the republics to be happy without having to dissolve the Soviet Union. But for it to work, the Soviet Union was going to need a lot of aid money. So Gorbachev spent the first half of 1991 going around the West trying to sell the plan, and the answer he got back from the United States was, maybe later. Well, that's fine. Gorbachev would just have to hold on for another year. He was still getting money from the Germans, and with that, he could buy...
В связи с невозможностью по состоянию здоровья исполнения Горбачевым Михаилом Сергеевичем своих обязанностей президента СССР.
They first moved in at 4 a.m., the first sign of the coup d'etat that removed Mikhail Gorbachev from power. With tanks in Red Square, the official word from the new government, calling itself the National Emergency Committee, was that the architect of Glasnost and Perestroika was too ill to continue in office.
Mikhail Gorbachev is now on vacation. He is very tired after these many years, and he will need some time to get better.
Tens of thousands filled Leningrad's Palace Square to demonstrate against the coup and cheer their republic leader, Boris Yeltsin.
Перед всем миром, подрывая наш престиж в мировом сообществе, возвращает нас к эпохе холодной войны.
Yeltsin's supporters reacted with their bare hands, building makeshift barricades with whatever piece of disused machinery or brickwork was available.
Generally speaking, around the Russian Federation building, people are defying the 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew. The people there say that they do not obey the laws of the military junta. They obey only the laws of Russia and the decrees of Boris Yeltsin.
How does a ragtag crowd prepare to fight a division of tanks? They toss a few more bricks on their flimsy barricade, pile up sticks and stones, and post a few more slogans.
The Soviet Union has entered its second night under military rule after a day of growing defiance and rising fears of bloodshed.
There has been now a report in from Reuters, the British news agency, that 3 people were shot dead outside the Russian parliament by Soviet tank crews.
Military convoys were seen heading out of Moscow. Tank drivers confirmed the coup was ending. To people manning the barricades here, the first sign the coup was faltering lay in the fact there was no all-out attack on the Russian Federation headquarters. The withdrawal came after dissension had developed in the military. At least 2 crack airborne divisions revealed they had thrown their allegiance to Yeltsin.
Less than 3 days after being placed under house arrest by communist hardliners, the Soviet president is to return to Moscow to retake the reins of government. The fate of the coup plotters remains unknown.
The end of the rally, the Russian flag was hoisted above the parliament building in place of the hammer and sickle.
Tens of thousands of people outside Boris Yeltsin's headquarters were elated. In their view, he had saved the day. Victoriously, they waved the Russian flag. And one speaker said, the black night of fear had become a new day of freedom.
The attempted coup of August 1991 only lasted 3 days, but that was more than enough to convince Ukraine that it couldn't wait for a compromise anymore. It declared independence 5 days later. But you already know the rest of Ukraine's story. Russia, on the other hand, faced the prospect of a majority Muslim and Asian Soviet Union. So Russia decided to quit the Union too, and refocus on rebuilding its economy under the guidance of its newly sovereign president, Boris Yeltsin.
It is indeed a great honor for me to address the Congress of the great land of freedom as the first ever, over 1,000 years of history of Russia, popularly elected president, as a citizen of the great country which has made its choice in favor of liberty and democracy.
But the now Russian reformers realized they faced a much starker choice. Unlike the other republics, the power ministries of the Russian state, the KGB, the ministers of the heavy industries, and the military-industrial complex were still being run by people either involved with or at least sympathetic to the coup. Yeltsin became convinced that if he wanted to stave off another reactionary putsch, he'd have to disband them, and that the only way to get a market system in place was to do it all at once in order to make it a fait accompli before anyone could stop him, even though this would mean privatizing property before actually having a way of protecting property rights, or ending price controls without controlling the money supply, or restructuring the economy without building a social safety net. In other words, their choice was between destroying the state or going back to the Brezhnev era. So the reformers became revolutionaries, and Russia's experiment in social democracy became an experiment in anarcho-capitalism, with predictable results.
Some prices had jumped even more than the 3, 4, or 5 times they'd expected. This butter was selling for 8 times the price it could have been bought for yesterday.
President Yeltsin emerged as the winner of a bloody power struggle with his opponents in Parliament and their allies on the streets.
Outside the building, bodies still lay where they fell. There was still no official estimate of the number killed inside, though the city medical authorities said nearly 500 had been treated for injuries.
Over the weekend, Russia sent a force of more than 40,000 into the Republic of Chechnya and heading towards the capital of Grozny.
Troops from Russia's Interior Ministry scramble at the sight of an approaching armored personnel carrier. They don't know if it's one of theirs or one of the Chechens. As it passes, they open fire, wildly, still none the wiser who they're firing at.
Starovoytova was gunned down in the hallway of her St. Petersburg apartment in late November. Most Russians regard the killing of this pro-democracy member of parliament as a political murder and as evidence that their country's post-Soviet reform era is ending.
For Russian people, democracy is synonym of criminal anarchy. They never saw democracy as working rule of the law mechanism. They don't know what it is.
Panicky Russians tried to withdraw their savings from banks while the country's financial system appeared to teeter on the brink of collapse.
The government virtually defaulted on its debt, and the ruble crashed in August.
Russia has continued to pound villages with their heavy guns, a tactics which the Chechens say has caused numerous civilian casualties.
At times, Russian soldiers have shut down the Ingushetia border and even shot at the fleeing refugees.
Commandos stormed a school in southern Russia today where militants held hundreds of hostages. Russian news accounts said more than 200 people were killed, more than 700 wounded. Many were children.
An inflation crisis, a parliamentary crisis, a street crime crisis, an organized crime crisis, an official corruption crisis, an alcoholism crisis, a banking crisis, a sovereign debt crisis, 2 civil wars, and an Islamist insurgency, all in the span of 10 years. And the KGB hardliners who forced this outcome would spend the next 30 years blaming foreigners and Jews. Meanwhile, in America,
today, a generation raised in the shadows of the Cold War assumes new responsibilities in a world warmed by the sunshine of freedom.
Bill Clinton takes office in 1993. With his 0 years of foreign policy experience on a platform 100% focused on domestic issues, he immediately faces a dilemma. Russia is on fire, and it looks like there's already a 50-50 chance it's a lost cause for the next 20 years. Unless you do something to protect the other countries of Eastern Europe, they might get dragged down with it. But if you make moves on those countries, Russians would interpret it as aggression, and you might accidentally push Russia into the abyss by trying to hedge your bets, when being nice to Russia might move it closer to America. And the foreign policy establishment in America seemed to be almost split 50-50 on what to do next. So why did America ultimately decide to take its chances with antagonizing an incredibly unstable Russia? That's where the Agency of Eastern Europe comes in. You will sometimes see people who supported NATO expansion complain that the NATO expansion sob story ignores the fact that Eastern Europe wanted to join NATO.
Let me in! Let me in!
Saying America expanded NATO basically treats these countries as pawns rather than real people with real aspirations. But that argument's wrong, because even that argument understates Eastern Europe's agency. Countries like Poland didn't get into NATO by just begging until America took pity. Poland blackmailed its way into NATO. In 1994, Bill Clinton's first plan for Eastern Europe was not to expand NATO, but rather to create a NATO holding room called the Partnership for Peace.
This partnership will advance a process of evolution for NATO's formal enlargement. It looks to the day when NATO will take on new members who assume the alliance's full responsibilities. It will create a framework in which former communist states and others not now members of NATO can participate with NATO members in joint military planning, training, exercises, and other efforts.
In the